out on Blu-ray, DVD, and it's also on Apple TV. And it is the movie is called Truth. It is based on the memoir of Mary Mapes, who was a producer for 60 Minutes. The movie is called Truth, and it stars Robert Redford as Dan Rather and Kate Blanchett as Mary Mapes. Both Dan Rather and Mary Mapes joins us now to talk about the movie Truth. Dan and Mary, welcome to Big 550 KTRS here in St. Louis.
Thank you. This morning. Thank you.
You got it. Let's talk to you, Mary, first. You wrote the book. How truthful is the movie Truth to your book, The Truth?
Well, I always say that the movie is my truth. It hews very closely to our experiences, both of us, and I think it really does present the situations that we lived back in 2004 when we reported a true story about President George W. Bush and ultimately lost our jobs because of it.
Both of you claim you claim, Mary, that it was a true story, and yet have the documents that you used in that piece ever been deemed authentic?
What you're doing is repeating the talking points that were sent out by the White House and by the Bush allies to distract completely from the truth of the story. What we reported was that George W. Bush had gotten into a National Guard unit in 1968 with the help of the lieutenant governor, who for the first time ever was interviewed by us for that story and admitted publicly he had gotten Bush in as a favor to the Bush family. Bush went into a unit where he had absolutely no chance of being sent into Vietnam. At the same time, his father and his father's political allies were championing the war in Vietnam for other people's children. And then Bush, during the course of his service in the Air National Guard, disappeared for a year, went down to Alabama, and did not fulfill his duties at all, and then ultimately left the Guard early. So those were the things that we reported, and those things were absolutely true. What they did, because they could not attack the truth of the story, was attack the process by which we arrived at that truth. The documents have never been proved to be inauthentic or authentic. As we reported, these documents were purported to be from Bush's commander's personal files to self. The problem with calling them inaccurate is that everything in those documents is accurate and falls completely in line with Bush's experience in the Guard.
The movie is called Truth. It's out on Blu-ray and on DVD. Dan Rather, all these years later, what mistakes were made, if any, in that story?
I'm sorry, McGraw. What was in the story?
Yeah. What was there? What were there any mistakes made in that story? And what do you say all these years later about the story?
No. Look, as you know, McGraw, that journalism is not a precise science. It's a crude art. We did not do the story perfectly. When does anybody ever do a story perfectly? But everybody's entitled to their own opinion, but they're not entitled to their own facts. And the central facts of the story were true when we reported them, and they remain true. I think it's important to note that neither President Bush nor anyone in his family nor anyone close around him has ever denied the central facts of the story. Because they couldn't deny the facts, the truth of the story, they attacked the process, as Mary said, by which we arrived at the story. Did we do it perfectly? No. Did we get to the truth? Did we report a factual story? The answer is yes. And I think that anybody who sees this film, whatever their political persuasion or ideological inclination, has to come away saying, one, the film is wonderfully acted. Number two, it raises important questions about journalism, political influence, and the meaning of truth. It also is very relevant to today. After all, this happened 11 years ago, but it's relevant today, even in this current presidential primary process we're going through, because it deals with the influence of big media, big government, big money, and the intersection in how they affect the political process. And for that reason, even if someone says, listen, I don't like Dan Rather or like CBS or what have you, there's a lot to learn from this film.
The movie is out on Blu-ray, DVD, and I saw it the other day on Apple TV. I was waiting for today so I could rent it. The movie is called Truth. Let me ask you, Mary Mapes, this question. Could you have told that same story without the documents, leaving that completely out of the story?
We could have told a very similar story. I felt that the documents, actually, because we had those, because we were able to contact a couple of people within Bush's guard unit, one of them the general who used to head the unit, he confirmed everything in the documents. If I had not had the documents, I would not have gotten him to confirm that, and the same is true for another person who was in the guard at the time. The key, though, is that people have to understand that for decades, the Bush family and Bush allies had covered up the truth about George W. Bush's Guard service, and they shut down anybody who tried to get at the reality of that service. And that included, making sure that almost everyone who served with him was locked up and, committed to complete silence on how George W. Bush had served in the Guard. So it was a crowbar by which we were able to finally pry out a little bit of truth. And that matters when you're trying to confirm a story as important as this.
Dan Rather, could you have told this story and left the documents out?
Yes, it would not have been as strong, and I don't think any reasonably experienced journalist, having the documents in hand, and I repeat for emphasis, neither the president nor anybody around him denied what was in the documents. And here we're talking 11 years later, and to this date, no one has ever proven that the documents were not what they supposed to be. I think we were right to include the documents, but I do want to deal with your question, which is, could we have reported the story, and would we have reported the story without the documents? And the answer is yes and yes.
It's the first time where, Dan Rather, you mentioned, they go after you, they criticize the messenger, they criticize the New York Times, CBS, you, whatever. This is the first time, though, that I can think where they actually went after evidence in a story, which was sort of a new way of sort of combating a negative story towards somebody.
Well, exactly, and you hit on an important point. Remember, this happened in 2004. The Internet was maturing, but not yet matured. And where the White House, and with the power of the presidency, they completely overwhelmed us as the reporters. They overwhelmed CBS News, and they overwhelmed the corporation and caused the corporation to cave and not back the reporters, because they understood the new world of the Internet and we didn't. If you want to talk about mistakes we made, one mistake we made was not realizing the new power of the Internet to put untruth out and overwhelm the truth. And we, among the biggest mistakes we made, were not realizing that from the very beginning. We knew we were going to take heat for this story, but always in the past, two things. One, the corporate entity, Viacom and CBS Inc., that owns CBS News, they had always backed their reporters, Murrow, Cronkite, all through the McCarthy period, through the Vietnam War, through civil rights, through Watergate. Well, what changed with the onset of the Internet is big government was able to control the Internet and therefore convince people that the running narrative was how we got to the truth, not the truth in the facts themselves.
So your contention is that George W. Bush went AWOL from his National Guard duty?
That's not my perception. That's what the facts show.
Mary Mapes, do you agree with that?
Nope.
Yeah, very much.
Yeah. I'm sorry, Dan. I didn't mean to cut you off there.
No, not at all. I was just going to say that anybody who's been in the military or has any family member in the military, you don't disappear from the U.S. military for a year, which George W. Bush did as a younger man. In some ways, I respect President George W. Bush for what he made of his life after his younger years. But, nobody disappears from the U.S. military for even a day, much less a year, and not be held accountable for it. And that's basically what the story reported as a fact. And it was a fact then, and it's a fact now. That
is Dan Rather. Mary Mapes, the movie is called Truth, taken from her book. It's on Blu-ray, DVD, and on Apple TV. Dan Rather, thank you for your time. Mary Mapes, thank you for your time. Good luck with the movie.
Thank you.
McGraw, thank you very much.
You got it. Anytime, guys. 919